I want to talk about just health more broadly, because what we were also talking about back there is how much the idea of health and how we advocate for ourselves and what we ask for has evolved, right? We are of a generation where things were not talked about. We treated physical symptoms. Everything is, how are you feeling? Is your stomach hurting? Not a lot of focus on the emotional, the spiritual, what was really going on at the root cause. So for both of you, when you think about your younger selves and how with our children, the idea of health is evolving today, how has that definition evolved for you both? From when we were younger, when we were just treating physical symptoms, to these pivotal moments in our lives where you guys thought about health much more holistically, to now raising children and grandchildren, how do you see health evolving, and what should we be doing to keep that going forward?
Well, I think, it depends on how old you are, right? In many ways, I think that I have two daughters in their 30s, and their version and their vision of women's health is dramatically different than what I'm dealing with. And my work is fueled by trying to make sure that their trajectory with women's health is dramatically different than my own. I'm of the generation, I'm a boomer, and every doctor's office I went into said, we don't know. I don't know anything. I don't have any research. I can't guide you. I can tell you what I think, but there's nothing here to back up what I'm saying. And that's unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. And so that fueled my work in Alzheimer's when I went to say, I think there are more women. And they're like, no, it's just because women live longer. And I'm like, I'm not going to accept that. And then we spent 2 years in the field reporting that, in fact, Alzheimer's did disproportionately impact women. It was 20 years in your brain before you were symptomatic what was going on with women. I think you heard Lisa Mosconi talk to that a little bit. And we started the Women's Alzheimer's Movement to fund work. We fund Lisa Mosconi and others to look at what is happening in women at midlife. But it was kind of not accepting the story as it was being told, right? And I think then also finding out, well, like, there wasn't any research for women in Alzheimer's. There wasn't any research for women, period. So we didn't know why women were 2/3 of those with Alzheimer's. We didn't know why women were the majority of people having depression. We didn't know anything about endometriosis. Why should women be on the pill? What's the impact on the brain of being on the pill for that long? What are the rising rates of infertility? Why are women postmenopausal in such frail health? And there's so many change makers in this room who you have heard from today, who are trying to bring you the most up-to-date information in women's health because they've specialized in these areas. But this is a deeply political issue. And I know a lot of times women don't, or people they're like, please don't bring up politics. But I'm like, I have to, because this is, it's interesting, because when we went to do the White House initiative, they're like, well, I don't know if we should call it the Women's Health and Research Initiative. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what? If you don't have your name on the door, like, you don't exist. And we are a history of not existing, right? And so, 8% of the NIH budget spent on women's health, I don't think so. Right. But this is where we're at, right? And so I think that we have to vote for people who want to invest in women's health and research across the board at every decade, right? This is an advocacy issue. So many in this room have been advocating around menopause about changing the black box warning. Advocacy works. It works. We've seen it over and over again. If you look at lobbying organizations, advocacy organizations, it works to be loud. It works to be a lot. It works to get out there. It's scary. So I'm not saying it's fun, but it works. And I'm not saying you're not going to get pushback. People aren't going to threaten you and all kinds of stuff. That happens. But if we want to see more funds allocated towards women's health, we have to vote for people who talk about it, who talk about caregiving, who talk about endometriosis, who talk about MS, who talk about postmenopause, who talk about bone health, who talk about the brain, and why do women develop so many neurological issues, and what is happening in women's life at midlife. We have to talk about all of it. We have to talk about maternal health. We have to talk about, why are Black women dying at double the rate? What's going on? And so I think we need to come together and not just talk in silos about reproductive health or about menopause, but talk about all across the board, and this is a chance for women to come together. You know, when I was having babies, people would say like, oh, the stay-at-home mom versus the working mom. It's like, you know, we don't have to be, we don't have to be, you know. My daughter should be interested in the menopause conversation. We can all be in this together, just like I want to talk to them about PCOS. Right? I learned from them about PCOS. We're talking about all of this. You know, they don't want to hear me talk about sexual health. They're like, I'm like, well, I want to talk to you because my mother never mentioned the word sex to me, ever.
Right.
You know, so it didn't happen. It wasn't something that occurred. And I'm like, well, how did I get here? You know, so but I think the more this is shared, but shared in the context, okay, we know this, we can share this. Where do we want to go with this? And that's the importance of community events like this. Where do we want to go with our stories? How do we want to bring our stories together? Because every single person in this room is what I call an architect of change. A person who sees a different future and has the courage to make it so. We're at a unique time, you know. And I think, you know, people think this is a scary time, and I get it. And it's a time when things seem to be breaking down or falling down, but there's also opportunities in moments like that. Because while everybody's scared and in the corner, the brave can take the main stage. They can take hold of the moment and say, well, you know what? Us women health advocates of every age, and you know, we may not agree on all kinds of political things, but we agree we need more research for women's health. We need to understand why all the medications that are given to us have not been studied on women, and therefore the doses have not been studied on women. That's unacceptable. And you want to be my age, and you want to have more information and more research to guide your health forward. You don't want to spend the last 10 years of your life. We always talk about women living longer, but they live in poor health. They live in poor financial health. They dominate nursing homes. That's not the future that any woman in this room wants, right? Your children can't afford it. You can't afford it.
Right.
And the only reason that will change is if each woman in here gets involved, because that's what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.